I went on the dark web because I heard a lot of cool stories about it. I just couldn't resist. All of my friends were talking about it and I just had to go check it out. I saw some really creepy stuff on it and I guess I was on stuff on the dark web that I shouldn't have been on. So I shut down my computer and resumed to my normal life. The next morning, I heard a loud knock on the door and what sounded like the police. So I go to the door and open it. The police are there. They ask me if my name is Henry and I tell them yes. That's me. They then arrest me and take me to jail. I'm 18, so I just made the cut for the adult jail. I was told that I was getting arrested because of my activity on the dark web. My parents tried fighting it, but there was nothing that they could do. I was only in jail for a couple months, but still, I was so young and I was frightened. Every day, I felt like I was in danger and just wanted to go back home. The jail I was in was a small jail. I guess it was for the inmates that were in for minor crimes and who were supposed to be getting out within a couple of months. We had more freedom. We worked outside and wasn't treated as badly since we were only minor criminals. One day, we were sent outside to work, the 5 of us inmates with only 1 guard. Usually, there would be 2 guards, but the other guard for some reason couldn't make it. So, we were all working and 2 of the inmates tackled the guard and then the other 2 go help the inmates and the guard is out cold. At this time, I only had 1 week before I was leaving, so I wasn't really trying to get in any trouble. The 4 inmates started to make a run for it while the guard was unconscious. In a split second, I ran with them. I knew I shouldn't have, but my mind ran wild and I just did it. Looking back, I probably should have just stayed, but then they could have blamed me and I could have got a longer sentence. So I decided to take my chances. I ran home and I see my laptop on the dark web page, and then I see my mom and dad. They asked me why I'm out early and my dad smiled and then they gave me a hug. After a couple of minutes of talking to them, the door slams open and it's the police. They tackle and arrest me. As I'm walking out, my dad apologizes for calling the cops and thanks me for taking the blame. As I'm on the way back to the jail, I put the pieces together. My dad has my laptop on the dark web website. He smiled and thanked me for taking the blame. I then realized that it was my dad who was doing the illegal things on the dark web using my laptop and not me. A couple months later, I go back home and there's nobody there. They packed up their things and moved. I don't know where they are to this day. I've never seen them again.
Mike was a host of a very popular nighttime chat show called The Nightline. He had a lot of controversial topics discussed and strange callers. But one night in November, he had the most controversial call ever, which he could have never guessed before taking it, that it would change his whole life. He was chatting about marriages and couples divorcing, etc. One caller who called himself Kevin rang just a few minutes before the show was about to end and was speaking about his wife arguing with him over and over, and he asked Mike for advice on what he should do. Mike was put on the spot, especially as it was so near the end of the show, but he decided to go with telling the caller to go with his instincts. Mike meant if he felt like getting separated or divorced, then go with his instincts. But as soon as Mike said it, a few seconds later, there was a loud sound of a gunshot in the distance. A few seconds later, there were police sirens. A gunshot in this city at night would cause a scene, so he knew it was definitely a gunshot after he heard the sirens. The thought crossed his mind, Could it be Kevin the caller shot his wife when he had told him to trust his instincts? Was he some sort of lunatic who took his words for gospel and trusted his instincts even though it was to kill his wife in cold blood? He hoped that wasn't the case. A few minutes later, Mike exited the building, and there was a man that seemed to be soaked standing outside, as if he was waiting for someone. The man asked Mike for a light. Mike took out his light and offered it to the man, but the man said, "Could you light it, please? I've a problem at the moment with my arm." Mike said, "Sure," and lit the man's cigarette. Suddenly Mike jumped back as the man burst into flames and said, "My name is Kevin." He looked into Mike's eyes as he was burning to death right in front of him. Mike was stunned, shocked, knowing that it had to be Kevin, the caller, who had just called him a few minutes ago. Within seconds, a police siren was heard, and they pulled up to Mike and the burning man. A cop jumped out and held the gun at Mike and shouted, "Stop! You're under arrest. Put your hands in the air where I can see them. You have the right to remain silent." The cop's voice was tuned out after that, as Mike was in a daze, knowing he was being arrested for the man's murder, and blamed himself for the man murdering his wife. Sam was so happy to have discovered from his dad a time travel machine. It was nothing fancy or big, just a watch. You set the time and press a button, and within seconds you whizzed either back in time or forward. He always was a big fan of JFK, but never got to see his inauguration speech, so was very happy to have a chance to travel back and see it and experience it in real life. He put in the time and date, and within seconds he couldn't believe it. He was actually standing in the middle of the crowd listening to John F. Kennedy give his inauguration speech.
Twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
After that, he knew what else he wanted to experience, and that was walking on the moon. So he set the time and place to the rocket just before they took off. His experience was absolutely amazing. Sam felt like he was dreaming when he was actually hiding in the spaceship, ready to walk on the moon as soon as he had the chance. He knew they would be all in spacesuits and had his ready, so that would be also a good way to blend in and not be seen by the others. To be an outsider. Everything was going great until when Sam was walking on the moon. Somehow his time travel watch came off with a gust of air. He hadn't realised until then that it was the rocket taking off to go back to Earth. He watched his time travel watch float off to outer space as he floated the other way, knowing that he had no way of getting back to Earth and would starve to death floating in space.
I was sitting on my own on a dark night, waiting for the bus. It was past midnight, and I wasn't living in exactly what you'd call a safe neighbourhood, so I was a bit tense. I noticed some movement from up the street and gave a quick glance. I don't know how many, and I don't want to appear too nosy, so just sit down and look right in front of me. There was a man and a woman who stood right in front of me. I didn't need to even turn my head to notice, as they were there right in front of me. The man seems to have been holding up a woman. More than likely she was drunk. I didn't make a sound. Suddenly my phone rang. I wasn't in the mood to answer, so I just let it ring out. The man shouted, "Who's there?" It had then occurred to me that the man was blind and didn't realise I was there until my phone rang. I spoke. "I'm just waiting for the bus." Suddenly I could see blood pouring from the woman and realised that the man was holding a knife. I froze in horror and got up and ran all the way home, which was a mile. There wasn't a second passed that I didn't think the man was going to jump up on me. Even though he was blind and it would be virtually impossible to him catch me, I didn't get the bus for a few weeks. I was so scared. I walked a mile to work and from work. But after a few weeks, I plucked up the courage to get the bus again. I was waiting once again at midnight, and there was a person in a trench coat standing next to me. My phone rang. Suddenly, the man in the trench coat grabbed me, shouting, "I knew I'd hear your ringtone again." I regretted having such a unique ringtone, realising that the man who was choking me had been the blind man that night who realised I was there after hearing my ringtone, and he knew that I was the same person after hearing it again.
Me and my friends were camping for the weekend, and we were really excited, as we had planned it for weeks. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls, 2 couples. We were deep in the woods when we decided to set up our tent. Each couple had their own tent. It was a moonlit night, so the brightness that was there was coming through the trees, even though it was still very dark, as the trees blocked out most of the moonlight, which added to the creepiness of the whole atmosphere deep in the woods. We lit a fire in the middle of the space we set up the tent. It was hard work gathering the wood, harder than I expected. I never expected it to be so hard building a fire in the woods. In the movies, it's almost like the fire is already there. After the fire was lit, we started drinking some beer and told ghost stories. Suddenly, when it was my time to tell my story, I heard some noise over by the trees. I feared it was a bear or even some crazy stalker. My friend walked over to investigate, and he suddenly jumped and screamed, then started laughing and said, "Oh my god, guys, ye are so overdramatic." Then suddenly something caught his eye. He was bending down to look at something in the grass and picked it up. He seemed to be holding a piece of wood, and whatever was on it was making him act very strange. We all asked him, what was it? When he walked over, he showed us and said, "That's weird, right? It was a piece of wood with 'Find Me' written in red. I felt fear overcome me, wondering, could it even be blood? My friend said, "What the hell is this about?" I said, "It looks pretty weird. I mean, find who?" My other friend was laughing, saying, "Maybe it's the boogeyman. Woo!" His girlfriend started laughing until there was another noise from over the other side of the clearing. My friend walked over and yet again saw another piece of wood with writing on it. He brought it over to show us. "I'm down this direction. Keep going." We all said together, "No way are we going down there." I didn't feel comfortable going to sleep, but it was too late to trek back out of the woods at this time of night, so we just decided to call it a night and be happy to get out of here in the morning. When we were just about to rest our heads and get some sleep, I noticed there was a shadow of a hand outside my tent. I froze in fear, anticipating what it could be outside, and told my boyfriend. He reluctantly opened the zip of the tent, and there, outside of the tent, was a little boy drenched from head to toe in water. He was about 10 years old, and he was crying, saying, Why didn't anyone find me?" Suddenly, he seemed to disappear into thin air. We had the pieces of wood with the writing gathered outside, so we decided to keep them to tell the police the next day. When we did, the sheriff looked at us, strange. "Ye damn kids, playing these sick games. Why can't ye let that poor boy rest?" That night, we learned that 10 years ago, on that very night, in the direction the piece of wood was telling us to go, a 10-year-old boy drowned while running from his parents to hide while they were playing hide and seek.